So this video is a quick overview of why we should get rid of gradings and what we could do to replace them with. So the odds of 2 expert observers, and this comes from the MET project run by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, is that 2 observers who have been trained in observation will only agree 60% of the time, so a little better than a coin toss. Research, however, allows us to focus on what is likely to lead to learning. So if we look at that as something that goes on over time, rather than individual lessons, we're more likely to come up with useful points to develop in our teachers and useful things to praise and seek to get others to take on board with those teachers as role models. So the only real question that we ask when we're observing a lesson is, how are the students learning? We're not looking for specific methods, we're asking how well, and when we find different ways that they're doing it, we seek to share that with other staff. So what's going to enable us to get staff to think about learning in this way and help us share it? We could have an observation form that looked just like this, that just said, how are students learning? And just record everything we found, rather like an Ofsted form. But that would be difficult to then summarise when we were looking at whole school or department results. So how do we make sense of what we find? To do that, we have to provide a frame. Now the frame should describe what learning looks like, and the problem with that is once people see that frame, they will say that's what decides what learning looks like. So there are big disadvantages in providing a framework unless we're absolutely confident that that's what learning should look like, in case that's how staff use it. So the existing frame of our lesson observation goes like this. We look at progress, marking and feedback. Oops, sorry, I'll just go back there. Teaching strategies, homework and behaviour. So an easy option is simply to keep the existing lesson observation form we have, and then use that to grade each section and find targets from each section. That's very low cost because we don't have to do any more work, we don't have to sell it to our teachers, it's already there in place. Of course we could change the frame, and I've just arbitrarily changed it to things that we might be interested in. So we can look at their curriculum they're teaching, how they teach memory, how they use Think, Pink, Go Green, how they encourage cooperative behaviour in learning. Or they might look at teaching, learning, behaviour and safety, leadership and management and progress, as Ofsted do. Or in their heads, whatever we put in, the teachers are likely to think this. If I do this, I will be judged outstanding. And so that's the danger of putting a checklist in. We're sending out exactly the wrong message. We want teachers to think about what good learning looks like. So if your lessons aren't being graded, we're giving you a way to improve learning no matter how great your teaching is. So even teachers who are good or outstanding, we're still going to say, what if you tried this? Have you thought about that? Will a framework allow us to do that? I haven't inserted it here, but the MET study that I referenced earlier also suggested that observation should count for 30% of performance management, the 7 C's for another 30%, and past results for another 30%. So those percentages should be 33. Yes, those should be a third each in giving you a reliable information about how teachers should do in the future. I bring this up because there's a danger that we place too much emphasis on the observation and not enough on these two. And in fact, this is something that we're not doing at all yet, and I think we should. So one solution in not simply providing a checklist. One way would be simply to use Dr. ICE, which about 13 of our teachers are used to through the Outstanding Teacher Programme. Dr. ICE stands for these 5 things. and they're just a framework for looking at learning rather than an outstanding teacher. And that's a great advantage of them. They focus entirely on learning. If we used it, we could put all of our assessment in those categories. And the question you'd be asking each time is, how well does this contribute to learning? Another alternative, however, is to look at what makes great teaching. And a great advantage of that is it's based on the available research. And Robert Coe, who's co-authored it, has made sure that he's ranked the likely effects, so it's having high impact or medium impact or low impact. In other words, we could be confident that we're asking teachers to do something which has value. And when I say asking, that would be the checklist. We wouldn't ask teachers to actually do that checklist. We'd focus on learning, but in the real world, teachers will use that checklist as a way to measure their own teaching. And so we need a checklist that's going to work for us rather than just give us some kind of learning by rote, let's please Ofsted sort of lesson planning. Okay, well this is the spreadsheet that Danny and I designed based on what makes great teaching. And of course the advantage of it, as I've just said, is that it itemises things with high impact. So these are the things that are worth 25 points here. And we'd simply use the drop-down menu to decide, having watched lessons, talked to students, how well the teacher did this. So let's say they sometimes know why students fail. And you can see 3 marks comes up. This was originally designed for teachers to review themselves in order to choose their own targets. But what if this was our lesson observation sheet? The great advantage of this is it would give teachers scores that were, we hope, meaningful, and they would also be able to get a total at the end, a score out of 100. We wouldn't predict what that score meant in terms of a grading. It would just simply be an actual score. Teachers could decide then which bits they needed to improve. So if I just take 3 here, knowing how students think about their learning is much more powerful than encouraging self-esteem, self-worth and confidence. Most teachers, I imagine, wouldn't believe that. And so they might opt for this kind of target, but actually that has a lower impact on learning. They'd be better off with a target from up here. The great advantage here is if they do take these things as a checklist, those things will all result in really strong learning, provided, of course, that they're done well. So the danger of the checklist is removed because teachers will be focusing on things which work when they're done well. Yes, there is a danger that a teacher would do all of these things and students still wouldn't make good progress, but that's because they would be doing these things badly. So it gives us a very good focus point. It's not something we're just dreaming up as an SLT. It has, if you like, the imprimatur of evidence behind it. It's something that no teacher can argue with empirically, only emotionally, and of course the response to that emotion would be to go back to the original research, the original publication, which is reasonably short and easy for teachers to digest. So this would be a very good solution to our problem. One additional problem that it might create for us is that we might need to comment on all of these things based on a lesson review, which is probably too onerous. However, we wouldn't necessarily have to. If we know that these are out of 25, we could just focus on that, and then the teachers would know where they were in terms of that area, or we could focus simply on this area, or both. Or it could be a true dialogue where we commented on the things that we observed and then invite teachers to fill in the gaps based on their knowledge. message, or indeed invite the students to do that. So that is another practical and beneficial way of looking at lesson observations. Now let's go to the final one. If I take you back to dot or ice, it's very easy to come up with things to look for. So in this example, deepening thinking, and I put in bold the things that teachers could actually do. So one advantage of this method is that it's much more specific than what makes great teaching. Those things tended to be a summary of your teacher skills. These are things that the teacher can actually do. In bold, I've highlighted those things that I think are part of what makes great teaching, and not in bold are things that other research, like Hattie, suggests would be worthwhile. So I'll just scroll through this. You'll obviously have it in print in front of you. But that would be another kind of checklist that teachers could use, both to plan lessons and to evaluate lessons. And when we were observing, we would just highlight, presumably, the thing that we were looking at, and then we could just tick it if we thought it was good, or cross it if we think there's a target appropriate next to it. Then, of course, at the end, we could have a simple way of grading each section. So that is another possibility. So let's summarise where we are. If we use dot or ice, we're focusing on learning, and the checklist therefore doesn't prevent teachers creating good lessons, and the things in it are hopefully linked to research. If we use the existing perspectives form, it is linked, focused entirely on learning, but it's linked to observation that's been graded in the past, and the categories have come from Ofsted, so that might send the wrong message. If we use the what make great teaching form, we're definitely focused on learning, and we're linking to the existing research. So I'm not going to be around, obviously. Please decide if you prefer either of these alternatives. Thank you, and hopefully good night.